Good afternoon and most welcome to 983. I will try to show a progress that have been made, and this is this very odd idea about polarities, distinctions, and the sort of difference between distinctions and difference. It's a tough one because they're gliding to each other, and as I usually done in the lecture, I said distinction is something subordinate, not as good, whereas difference is more to the flesh, more complex, more interesting. I can actually give you an example now. I just realized I did one of those distinction things by dividing. I was supposed to write granddaddy, whatever that is in for short in English, but I only know what grandmother is for short. It's granny. And you made a sort of a polarity. It has to be a granny, that's short for grandmother, and therefore it has to be something short for granddad as well, as it is in Swedish. So see how we build up polarities. So my conclusion was that the male variety should be gran, and that's a mistake. But I think this is an exercise how we work when we don't go into the complexities, because the whole affair is much more complex. And of course, you can give different examples on why there is no short term for granddad. There is no term like grano or such. Possibly it could be that we usually don't feel the same affection for granddad or some other sort. But the explanation comes later. This mistake I made here, that is actually incredibly common. I see it every day when I open the newspaper. They write something about the weather, politics, geography. It's a very common mistake. I have many examples. One I really liked was that a Swedish author said Ireland should be one because it looks like a whole, like a wholeness, and therefore Northern Ireland should not be separate. This is similar to that conclusion. Do you see how it takes away knowledge? I wrote something incorrect, I thought something incorrect, and I would actually say this is by far the most common reason for lack of knowledge. It's always polarity. So polarity is not a thing in such. It's a tendency that can work on several levels, because underneath we could have a specificity that needs to be taken apart. So underneath there could be more complexities. But you can see also here what Derrida is doing. And this is also one of the reasons for every new book Derrida written, and for every new discourse, for every new article, for every new lecture, the difference is always different. You cannot generalize. Yes, I am guilty of generalizing metaphysics of presence, but it doesn't have a clear meaning. I just emotionally show how we get stuck in something. And this is very, very important to understand. And this is why, of course, the book of Rodolphe Gachet, The Taint on the Mirror, was so incredibly important, because he gave me, or gave us, a gestalt to understand, because it can only be bodily, intuitively understood. Cannot be explained, cannot be generalized, because it is not something universal. It's helping every singular text, and it's very important. Doesn't have text in general. This is of course why the Yale School of Literary Criticism is so off, completely off. It is so far from correct as it can be. It's simplification, it's Derrida's deconstruction made into simple mechanical rules of turning upside down. And the same thing happened in Oregon and Washington with the universities and colleges over there, where people actually attack the principal and professors. I think Greenboro is the most extreme example, where one professor actually was threatened to his life. So the police in the college said, you should better leave the area because your life is under threat. And he made a YouTube channel, actually a little bit like the friend of you, Kalle, who made a YouTube channel about people who left Jehovah's Witnesses. So he made a YouTube channel about these tendencies in Oregon and Washington. Maybe they contributed to the criticism coming from Jordan Peterson, or I'm quite sure they did. But he still misses the point. What I'm going to do today is something I've been waiting to do for a while, and this is to connect deconstruction to what I call intention, but in a very loose sense. In the sense maybe that there is an intention, a want, when you look into the river for the vortex to exist. The very fact that it exists is a want, and we try to humanize want too much, but you can obviously see want in the world. This is something that actually did not disappear in antiquity. The physics of still Aristotle had want in it. So want doesn't necessarily have to imply soul or humanness. Want can still be there. Newton hated want. He wanted to get rid of it. But maybe want is not the best word, but you can call it integrity, wanting to be an individual, having one direction, and those things are really obvious in the universe. They're too obvious to be sort of covered anymore. Blake, in his book Chaos, he points out intention is obvious everywhere, and trying to humanize intention is maybe one of the worst mistakes physics ever made. Things can have an intention without being humans, and that intention can be incredibly strong as well. So I loosely call it intention. Don't confuse that with human intention, or if there is such a thing as human intention. And of course, this has connection to the why question. And this is also what I usually call before existence, or before existences, to be accurately specific. And here we have the posterior. Here we have the what question. In this area we can only ask what, and we only have existence or existences. Actually, we can't even ask the what question here, because if we don't start with the why question, this is Heidegger's point, we are not even allowed to the what question, but we will still ask it. And one could say, huge oversimplification, but we need to do one big simplification a day. It's good for you. You could say that the answer to the what question is the metaphysics of presence. It's not much of an answer, yes, but that's the only answer we can get if we ask the what question. And this was also the point of Nietzsche in Gay Science and many of his other books, that we can't know anything anymore. So it's not much of an answer, metaphysics of presence, but it's a little bit, if you ask a question, you get an automatic answer somehow, some sort of answer. It doesn't mean that the question is just, or that there can ever be an answer to that question. There cannot be any answer to this question. Once we went into the posterior, we cannot have knowledge. And that's pretty grim. We can have knowledge, but then we get this horrible thing, intention. Why? Why do we have a world? Well, there's an intention. There is a reason for things. Things have reason, and they still have to a certain extent in Greek time. That's interesting. Why did it disappear? I say it was like an eroding process. Once you started it, it didn't fully develop until Newtonian times, or maybe a bit earlier already with Descartes. But the why question, which is the absolute sine qua non to have the what question, disappeared. And obviously replacement for the why question is the Laplacian demon and other paradoxes that shows that the whole project had some problems to it. But until you understand, it's really down to the what question. That we need to be able to answer that one. We will be forced to go to the why question, even though we don't like it. And to be perfectly honest, I didn't like it myself. And that was my idea by forcing myself a little bit Sunday here. I know I didn't like to go that way. The reason is I'm so ingrained with metaphysics of presence. I've been studying for a long time. It is in my system. It's very hard to combat. But all of a sudden I realize I need to answer the why question and its intention or direction or permanence. Because without intention we cannot have permanence. It's an absolute impossibility. We need a sort of intention. And intention is obvious in nature, whereas the forces of Newton are not obvious in nature. They are actually predicated on nature. And to be really tough on Newton, we could say he tries to answer the what question, and well, at least he puts the what question. Does he answer it? No. He never answers it, because it doesn't have an answer. And Newton knew that. Poor Newton. What can the why question do for us? Well, I think there is a shift. It takes some time to get over it. But then all of a sudden, you start to realizing what I thought existence to be is something a bit more. It always imposes teleology. It's always there. And my purpose, what I want with the world, is an absolute presupposition for any world to exist. That doesn't mean that I alone create the world, but it's only with my projection that the world can come about. Whereas in this case, you don't have a world. You are then living in the simulacra of Ian McGilchrist. He describes modern man as living in his own inventions, having no contact with any exterior whatsoever. Tough. It's really tough. But it's well founded. He's been doing his own work, and for this last book, or books, he had a lot of help. It's the most massive thing seen on this earth ever. So it's pretty hefty proof that we are now living in the making of our own fantasy, because the price we have to pay for giving up the intention, the will in the world, is that we don't have any access to the world in any exteriority. Everything becomes our passive making, because what sheer fantasy is nothing but sitting at the theater. Imagine that you are at the theater, then in some sense you have absolute fantasy, because you're sitting passively just looking at the world. Oddly enough, you just perceive what's happening, and it is actually the actors that do the whole play. And this passive thing doesn't work with the world. It's completely hopeless. You don't get any perception, you don't get any thinking, you don't get any knowledge. Because you really need to send things out. You need to send things out in a very decisive manner. In some way you can say this is what Newton and Descartes did. They made their theories. But it's a little bit, we can't live in their theories. Everyone has to do their own fractal take on the world, an active projection of what the world is. And we have to construct that ourselves in being able to meet the exterior. Because we know the only chance of having any read-off is that we send something off. And that sending off is the intention also, what we want. So we sort of go from saying that in analytical philosophy, intention, human want, our emotions, our desires has nothing to do with the world. And then we end up in quantum mechanics, which says that everything has to do with what you want. It's a part of existence, true existence. And then we can also answer the what question. We can start to understand what are the characteristics of the world, what properties does the world have. And it's even down to those things as length, breadth, width, everything to do with the world. Otherwise, the whole set of properties of the world will be blocked off. And that also means that these different helping methods that have been constructed, for instance, by Kant, to having already made categories for the world, that won't work. They are a sort of proxy for someone who's completely passive, and pointing and saying, those things exist there, rules for how perception should be. So it's not unjust to say that Kant was a defender of passive perception. It comes in his categories. He says certain categories are actually automatic, like length, breadth and width. And we don't have to do anything to perceive them. This is wrong. And he also says that existence could be perceived anyway. You don't have to do anything. It's like a filter, you just get it automatically. No, it's not true. You need to project yourself. And the more you project, the more reality you get. So you see here, it's an inequality. Depending who you are, your subjective complexity will determine how much access you have to the world. It's never the same. And I think that was the last, so to speak, nail in the coffin for the idea of representationalism. And that is coming from Ben Ariely. He shows clearly with his really big investigation in Israel and USA, we do not participate anymore in our own lives. We've given up the steering capacity. We constantly weaken ourselves to happenstance, randomness, the will of others, conformism, and those things. And therefore, we cannot be satisfied with our existence. He battled horrible obstacles and he grew strength. And I think his explanations are partly good. They've always been lacking something, but how much can you expect from the person? But his adversities were tough. Mysterious circumstances. He was fuddling with a phosphor bomb, I think it was something like that, and he caught fire, and he had 3rd-degree burns all over his, no, 70% of his body had 3rd-degree burns. And he went in for treatment and he was lying down for a couple of years. And on top of that, he also got an infection from the blood transfusions he had to take. And then he also got hepatitis C, for which he had to take chemotherapy or some sort of chemotherapy for a couple of years. And he also had to do that without any the thing with hepatitis C, you don't feel anything. It's the liver that becomes affected, and it doesn't give any symptoms. You don't feel bad until it stops working completely. So, and that makes for lack of motivation. And lack of motivation, it's something that Ben Ariely points out. And we can, by understanding that we are the makers of our own world, but not in the sense that we usually find in quantum mechanics, books for laymen about quantum mechanics, that just say you construct your own world, and it sounds like magic. Well, if I can construct my own world, then I want $1 million here and now. In that case, I want a ticket to Hawaii so I can go there, and so forth and so forth. What we need to understand is the world is two things. It is a difference between two things. It is not the sum of two things. It is not the equality of two things. It is sending out a difference to another difference. And the more we send out, the more we perceive of reality. So reality is not like we feel in the lower complexity of 1 and 0, correctness. It is complexity. And of course, as long as we are stranded in this lower thing, we need to look for certainties by original truths and those things. But those are simple helping tools, and they often lead us astray. Sometimes they can show us to the truth, but they often lead us astray. And this is a problem I've been pondering about. I wanted to have this book also. It was written a couple of years ago by a Swedish author. I don't remember her name now, but it was a whole book on how to find the truth in the modern world, with so much fake news, fake information, disinformation on the net and so forth. And the whole book was an endless array of different rules for how to be critical of sources and everything. And when I read the book, I understood directly that won't work. It's way too complicated. It needs that you are a doctor in at least 20 different subjects. And that's a horrible way of saying to people, you can reach truth this way, because it's just way too complicated. It's too hard. And this is always going for the source, the genuine things, and you need like 50 parameters to understand the whole correlation. And who understands statistics for once? You need to be as good as the best professor in statistics to understand what statistic means. This is the reason politicians ask the statistician, what does it mean that you say? Because we can't even interpret their information. I say this goes for the lower level. And fractality shows you can go directly and know what's good for you. You don't need the different levels. You don't have to go down to the atoms as the pre-Socratics suggested. You don't have to know the arcane of the world to understand how to sort of navigate in the world. You don't have to go down to the source to know what knowledge is. You don't have to go to the original scripture or anything to know what the original is. You can know that yourself. And you can know that because if you make yourself complex enough, you can reach out and reach the other complexity. This is actually what she was searching for, the more advanced complexities. This is what she called truths. And they are important for us because they are the pinpointer where we should go, what we can trust in, what is good for us, what is benevolent to humanity and our kin and our nation and so forth. And I think she had a sense that we lost that. And I would say we have. But it can be reached again by changing ourselves. There is where we need to start, because the world is observer dependent, but not only observer. It is endogenous and exogenous together. And it's not 1 and 0. You cannot have this corner question and say, is it true or not? And put like this. It's not working like that way. The world is physical. It is not some abstract thing in the Platonic universe. It is an actuality. And the actuality, to perceive it, you need to intend your whole organism towards it. And you also need to train that, because that training is absolutely crucial. And I think that was also shown by this monozygote experiment they made. The most extensive project in modern times about twins that are monozygotic, actually identical twins. And it shows that in Korea there was a difference in median on 16 on the IQ scale. This is just incredible. Shows if you learn to actually project, if you train yourself, you will receive a sharpness. It's just beyond belief. And 16 doesn't even cover, because we don't even have tests yet for complexity. I'm quite sure that will come. Froebel suggests that later in her book. But when it comes, we will see even bigger differences between East and West. And I think it's good for us to understand that now, because we gain in both ends. We get healthier, we get more directed, more balanced, but we also gain more of the world. So it's a plus-plus situation. There's no loss in this project. It's only gain. Well, I'll round about there and I say thank you very much and have a very pleasant afternoon.